What was your biggest "we need to leave now" moment? Story 1. I've written about this before. I was at a mall in Indonesia when I noticed two tourists struggling to communicate with the cashier at a bookstore. I decided to help translate. They were grateful and offered to buy me drinks as a thank you. I politely declined, explaining that I needed to get back to my mom soon. They insisted I join them for dinner instead. Again, I declined, saying I had to eat at home. Then they suggested I sneak out after dinner to meet them. At this point, a bookstore staff member noticed something was off and intervened to question the two men. Taking advantage of the distraction, my sister and I quickly left. As we continued exploring the mall, we realized the men were following us. To check if it was just our imagination, we ducked into a lingerie store, assuming they wouldn't follow us there. But they did. We ran straight back to the jewelry store where our mom was shopping. Thankfully, the store had intimidating security guards, and that seemed to deter the men. I was only 11 years old and my sister was 10. Story 2. Woodstock 99. I could feel the energy of the overcrowded masses, the rising tension, and the simmering anger. I turned to my friends and said, "We need to leave." They chose to stay, but I left. Not long after, fires broke out and riots began. My friends lost everything they had brought with them: tents, clothes, food, everything. When you pack 300,000 people shoulder to shoulder in sweltering 104-degree heat with oppressive humidity, charge $4 for a single bottle of water, and provide half as many bathrooms as needed, disaster is inevitable. Story 3. I was waiting at the train station to pick up a friend. Since I arrived early, I decided to stand in the sun just outside the station. A man with a bicycle approached me, speaking in broken English, and asked when the train would arrive. I answered his question, but he lingered and started chatting with me. While this wasn't unusual, his questions, demeanor, and appearance gave me an uneasy feeling. Eventually, he asked if I could walk with him while he dropped off his bicycle. I declined. The bike storage area was secluded, and I didn't want to be alone with him. I walked into the station instead. He started shouting, calling me names, but at that moment the train arrived and the station got crowded. He left. A few months later, I read an article in the local paper about a girl who had been assaulted at the same station. They included a sketch of the suspect. It was the same man. To this day, I'm thankful I trusted my instincts and didn't go with him. Story 4. I was grocery shopping with my grandma. She was tired, which was normal for her, but this time she seemed slower and was dragging her leg more than usual. At the checkout counter, I noticed her face was slightly drooping. That was when I decided we were leaving immediately and heading to the ER. The store gave her a bottle of water for the car ride, but she ended up choking on it and vomiting all the water. I called ahead to the ER so they could be prepared. When we arrived, they acted quickly and confirmed she was having a stroke. Thankfully, they were able to treat her in time and she avoided any lasting complications. Story 5. About 2 months ago, I stayed up later than usual. Just as I got into bed, I noticed a strange smell and heard inconsistent banging and clattering from downstairs. I live in a neighborhood where unusual noises aren't uncommon, but something felt off. I got out of bed to check and saw flames creeping up the side of the building. I shouted for my wife to get up, quickly threw on some clothes, and we ran out of the apartment. Our building shares a wall with the next one, and by the time we got outside, the apartment on the ground floor of the neighboring building was fully engulfed in flames. I was the first to call 911. The fire ended up condemning the entire building. Since then, I've been waking up in a panic at night, reliving the moment. Story 6. It was around 10 p.m., and I was waiting for an Uber with a couple of friends on the outskirts of Atlanta. We had just left a restaurant and were casually chatting about which bar to go to next. An older, disheveled man walked up behind one of my friends, struck a strange pose, and stared at us for a solid 2-3 minutes without saying a word. Then he walked off. A few minutes later, he came back and sat down on the sidewalk, about 5 feet away from us. It felt odd because the area was mostly empty and there was no apparent reason for him to sit so close. Then I noticed a small sedan pull into a parking lot nearby. It parked behind some bushes, in the spot furthest from the shops but closest to us. I happened to be facing that direction and saw 6 men climb out of the car. They immediately crossed the street and headed straight toward us. That's when it hit me. The strange man might have been watching us earlier to mark us. We were all dressed up with our smartphones out and visible watches, basically looking like an easy target. Just as I was about to tell my friends we should head back toward the restaurant, our Uber pulled up. As we drove away, I saw the 6 men gather in a circle where we had just been standing. A moment later, they crossed the street and got back into their car. I can't say for sure what their intentions were, but I'm convinced we were seconds away from something bad happening. Story 7. A friend invited me to a seminar. Everyone there was dressed in white shirts, black pants, and black shoes. I was the odd one out, dressed casually. For some strange reason, the attendees were praising the founder as if he were a god. Once I entered the auditorium, they started showcasing how 17-year-olds were supposedly earning Rs 200,000 a month, around $3,500, with their own bikes, cars, and all sorts of luxuries. It suddenly hit me. This setup felt eerily similar to a massive scam that had used a similar business model about 7 years earlier. I wanted to leave immediately. My friend, who seemed completely brainwashed, was sitting a few rows behind me. Strangely, those involved in the marketing were required to sit separately for some odd reason. The whole experience was cringeworthy at best and exploitative at worst. I never caught up with that friend afterward. It's worth mentioning that he wasn't a bad person. He didn't try to force me to buy anything, possibly because we had studied in different cities. From the outside, the product looked decent, but the selling method screamed MLM, multi-level marketing. I later heard about another person in the group who had gone to my school, though I didn't know him personally. He aggressively pressured one of my family friends, who had also gone to the same school, into buying the product. When she refused, he resorted to swearing and harassing her online. I'm not entirely sure if this was a full-fledged MLM, because the participants weren't required to buy products in bulk, probably because most of them were students. I don't even remember the company's name, so I have no idea if it's still operating. Story 8. A friend and I decided to explore an abandoned hospital. The site consisted of several interconnected buildings. All the doors and windows were boarded up except for one spot where we could squeeze past a loose board. Once inside, we had access to most of the main building. It was pitch black, but we had flashlights, so it wasn't too bad. We kept mental notes of the layout to make sure we remembered which wing we came in from. Eventually, we reached a room filled with leftover items, beds, filing cabinets, and other cool stuff. We decided to turn off our flashlights to use the camera flash for pictures. For about 10 minutes, we only saw the room in brief bursts of light from the camera. Then we started noticing noises. In an abandoned building, you expect water dripping or wind making strange sounds, but this was different. We heard creaking floors, doors groaning, and the occasional scrape or crash of metal on the floor. It sounded like someone or something was stumbling around in the dark. The way back to the exit required us to move toward the noises. There was no other route. Growing more anxious, we cautiously made our way back, pausing frequently to listen. Finally, we reached the side hall we had come in from. We bolted toward the door at the end, only to realize it was the wrong door. We stood there, frozen, as the footsteps grew louder. Whoever or whatever was making the noise was getting closer. Cornered in the dark, we held our breaths, listening as the shuffling and scraping passed right by us and slowly faded away. Once the coast seemed clear, we crept back into the main building. Spotting a sliver of light from the loose board, we carefully moved toward it. Suddenly, a deafening scrape and bang echoed behind us, like someone toppling a massive metal filing cabinet. It was so loud it startled both of us. I yelled, "Time to go!" and we sprinted for the exit. Clear footsteps followed us as we ran. We dove through the loose board and down the overgrown path. Turning back for a quick glance, we couldn't see anything through the gap. We didn't stick around to see if that would change. Story 9. My friend and I, both women, met up for the first time after coming back home from college. It was an unusually nice day for winter, so we decided to grab lunch and eat outside. We found an empty park and sat at a picnic table catching up. A scruffy-looking guy in a large work van with no rear windows pulled into the parking lot. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him, but I noticed him moving around outside the van and glancing our way repeatedly. He eventually walked down the sidewalk toward us, passed by our table, and then disappeared behind the restroom building, looking down the hill on the other side. He seemed to be scoping out the area. Returning to his van, he opened the back and started rummaging around. He made a call on his cell phone, and a few minutes later, another man arrived in a separate car. The two began talking, and I saw the first guy not so subtly point in our direction. They immediately started walking toward us. My friend and I quickly gathered what was left of our lunch and walked briskly out of the park, keeping a close eye on them. The whole situation gave me chills. I could literally feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It could have been nothing, but even now I'm convinced they had something planned. I'm glad we trusted our instincts and left. Story 10. I was on a date with a girl. hiking along a trail system I knew like the back of my hand. Something about the evening felt off, but I brushed it aside. We started the hike around sunset, planning to swim in one of the deep pools in the creek. About 2 miles in, that uneasy feeling hit me again. She was chatting nonstop, but I found myself focusing on the sounds around us instead. Suddenly, I told her to stop talking. She gave me a concerned look, but I just put a finger to my lips and listened. I could hear something, a sound I couldn't quite place, but it was familiar. We didn't stop walking. When we reached the arroyo just before the creek pool, I heard the noise again. This time, I knew what it was. I told her we needed to turn back after reaching the clearing. She mentioned that she had also heard something strange. As we stood in the clearing, dead silent, her nails dug into my arm from how tightly she was gripping me. About 15 feet away, the largest mountain lion I'd ever seen stepped into the clearing with 2 cubs. She froze and locked eyes with us. In that moment, it felt like my soul left my body. The lion stood still, sizing us up. Her cubs stopped too, occasionally glancing back at us. After what felt like forever, she turned and slowly walked away, her cubs following. They kept looking back at us as they climbed the hill and disappeared. We immediately turned around and warned everyone we passed on the trail about the 3 mountain lions. Every single person turned back. That was the first time I ever felt real fear in nature. I wasn't carrying a handgun, and I had hiked that trail 100 times before. Later, she told me that the strange sound she had heard was a deep purring. I realized that's what I'd been hearing too. I just hadn't connected the dots. Story 11. Last May, I, 19F, was on a Greek island with my cousin, 22F, as part of a trip. We loved taking aimless walks outside the towns we stayed in to explore the surroundings. On one of these walks, we found ourselves on a long, narrow road that dropped off on either side to beaches. A small green car passed us, heading in the same direction we were walking. It stopped about 5,100 yards ahead of us and just sat there. We thought maybe they were admiring the view, so we kept walking. When we reached the car, the passenger side window was down, and the man inside was staring at us through his mirror. As soon as we passed, the car pulled forward, passing us again. Not long after, a large black truck drove by and pulled up alongside the green car. The driver stopped and seemed to have a brief conversation. The green car sped off, while the black truck moved forward a bit and then stopped on our side of the road. By this point, things felt off. The road was narrow and we couldn't turn back because the town was ahead of us, while behind us was just beaches and a couple of houses. As we approached the truck, the driver opened both the front and back doors but just stood there, mostly watching us. That's when we decided this was way too sketchy. We left the road and climbed down onto the beach, trying to stay as far away from the road as possible. While we hurried along the beach, the man from the truck crossed the road and watched us from the side of the beach, with binoculars. We ran until we caught up with another couple and followed them back into town. Along the way, we kept seeing the green car drive past us repeatedly, as if it was keeping track of where we were. Once back at our apartment, we locked the doors, tied them shut for extra security, and stayed inside. In hindsight, it felt like we narrowly avoided a situation straight out of Taken. Story 12. Back in college, I had my first solo apartment. A guy who lived across the hall would sometimes come over to hang out or invite me over, but I wouldn't call him a friend. One night, he asked me for a loan. I didn't want to lend him money, and I didn't really have any to spare, so he asked for a ride to his girlfriend's place instead. She apparently had some money for him. I reluctantly agreed. When we arrived at her apartment, there was a small party going on. The moment we walked in, everyone went silent and stared at us. He went off to find his girlfriend, who turned out to be his ex-girlfriend. Things got awkward fast. He started arguing with her, and we were basically thrown out of the apartment. Then he asked me to drive him to another part of town. He said he owed someone money and needed to talk to them. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We drove to a sketchy part of town, where he instructed me to park in a secluded spot. He explained that he didn't want the guy to see my car because he might take it. Apparently, he owed this guy money for gambling or drugs and was way behind on his payments. At that point, I left him there and went home. After that night, I avoided him for the rest of my time living in that apartment. Story 13. In early 2019, my girlfriend at the time and I were walking through the woods near my house, something we often did. We were in the middle of an argument over something trivial when I noticed movement off the trail. Through the trees, I spotted a man in a dark top and blue jeans. People walked through these woods all the time, but what stood out was that he wasn't on any trail. He was walking through the dense overgrowth. I told her to stop talking, a bad move mid-argument, I know, But she only got more irritated. I told her again and pointed in the man's direction. At first, she didn't see what I was talking about. I told her to look for the blue of his jeans, and then she spotted him. The man was walking through the overgrowth, following us. He looked older, but I didn't want to take any chances, especially with my girlfriend there. I told her, "Let's go, we have to leave," and we picked up the pace. The problem was we were in the middle of the woods, far from any exits, and my girlfriend wasn't exactly physically fit. Walking fast was tough for her. I kept looking back, and the man was still following us, staying hidden in the overgrowth. We eventually made it out of the woods and decided never to go back there together. I've since returned many times on my own and have had a few strange encounters with someone who looks like the same man. I've seen him 3 times now, always watching me from a distance. He's never done anything besides follow me, but it's unsettling. Story 14. In April 2018, I was driving for Lyft. Around 1:30 a.m., I picked up a young couple from a bar. They were chill, and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. The guy asked if we could stop at a corner store on the way to their destination so we could grab cigarettes. I didn't see any harm in waiting, so I stopped. While he was in the store, I had a nice chat with the woman. He took about 5 minutes since the store was packed with people buying last-minute beer before closing. When he came back, he asked me to take them to another location about a mile in the opposite direction of their original destination. He said he wanted to meet some friends and grab some beer. I figured, why not, since it was my last ride anyway. I knew the town fairly well, but I wasn't familiar with approaching this particular spot from the direction we were coming from. I ended up missing the turn into the complex parking lot and stopped on the empty street to ask if they wanted me to park there or pull into the lot. That's when they started arguing. The guy wanted to go inside and hang out, but the woman didn't want to go in. She just wanted him to do his thing quickly so they could go home. Then I heard a loud, unmistakable thud on my car. My first thought was that someone hit us, but the road was empty. I checked to see if I had hit something, but I was in park. Nothing made sense. The woman's demeanor suddenly shifted. She looked around nervously and said, "Can we just get out of here? It hurts, and I want to go home." This struck me as odd since she had been fine the whole time. Then she said, "It hurts, and I can't move," put her hand to her back and pulled it away covered in blood. The guy started panicking, thinking something in the trunk had exploded, but my trunk was empty. Then he noticed a small white piece of filler fuzz sticking out of the seat. He pulled it out and realized it had come from a hole in the seat. That's when we both realized what had happened. She had been shot. I immediately slammed the doors shut and drove straight to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away. The sheer terror of realizing someone had fired at us and could still be nearby was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. Story 15. When I was 15, I took about 10 of my little cousins to the park. 3 of my older cousins, who were around my age or slightly younger, came along to help. As we approached the park, I noticed a man with 2 kids already there. The man came up to me and started talking. I tried to give him hints that I didn't want to chat, but he kept going. I asked, "Oh, are these your kids?" He nodded and continued asking me weird questions like, "Are you married? Are those your kids? And how old are you?" I lied about my name and age and tried to walk away. But then he said, "I like you. Do you want to sit with me and talk?" I told him I needed to talk to my family first and would join him afterward. Smiling, I walked over to one of my older cousins and quietly said, "Pretend everything is fine, but we need to leave now." She nodded, and we started gathering everyone. As we were leaving, I saw the 2 kids walk away without the man. We made sure he wasn't following us and didn't see where we were going. Later, I found out he had picked up one of my little cousins and put him down again, but one of my older cousins froze and didn't say anything at the time. Luckily, we saw the man walk into a house nearby and called the police. Story 16. About 3 months ago, there was a shootout at my office park. My next-door neighbors were robbed and beaten, but their partner arrived during the robbery, waited for the robbers to exit, and opened fire on their car with an AK-47 in the parking lot. Turns out my neighbors weren't Amazon resellers as I thought. They were drug dealers. While the robbery was happening, I felt sick to my stomach and had a strong urge to leave. As I was walking toward the door, I got an even worse feeling and decided to go back inside to use the bathroom. While in the bathroom, my heart was racing, and I didn't know why. I ended up dribbling on my leg because I was shaking so much. That's when I heard the shots. 2 bursts. I hit the floor and stayed there, hiding in the bathroom. When I finally came out, the parking lot was filled with people, and the air reeked of gun smoke. Miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. I ran 2 miles home. Later, while watching the security tapes, I saw myself walk directly in front of the shooter twice as he sat in his car, waiting to ambush the robbers. If I hadn't gone back to pee, I would have been right in the middle of it all. That decision to delay leaving might have saved my life. Story 17. I used to love driving at night, especially on the country roads near where I live. They're fun to zip around, and I'd often use them to unwind. One evening after hanging out at a friend's house, I decided to take a drive to my church, about 30 minutes away, and then head back home while listening to music. The route was one I'd taken countless times, every Sunday for 17 years, either being driven or driving it myself for about 4 years. Even in the dark, I felt confident, sticking to the 60 miles per hour speed limit. But about a quarter of the way there, I started feeling uneasy. My stomach was in knots, and I just knew I'd regret continuing. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't that late. The weather was fine, and I didn't want to waste the opportunity for a peaceful drive. But as I got closer, the uneasy feeling worsened, and I decided to turn around just before reaching the hill pass that marked the halfway point. The moment I turned back, the anxiety disappeared, and I forgot all about it. The next morning, I got into my car to drive to church and found my usual route closed. It turned out that on the hill pass, the road had crumbled away overnight, leaving a sheer drop right around a blind bend. The damage was reported by a driver going the opposite direction only 5 minutes after I'd turned back the night before. If I hadn't trusted my gut, I likely would have been seriously injured, or worse. Story 18. I was hiking with 2 friends crossing through some large farms. One of the fenced areas we passed through had a massive herd of cows, about 150 of them, along with 20 calves. As we walked through the field, the cows started slowly gathering behind us. At first we didn't notice, but then we realized they were encircling us. They moved in total silence, standing shoulder to shoulder and facing inward. By the time we understood what was happening, they had surrounded us in a 300-degree circle. The gap was about 20 meters wide, and they were only about 20 meters away from us. Panic set in, and we sprinted the last 50 meters to the edge of the fenced area. When we hopped the fence, the cows followed us right up to the edge. One black bull in particular stood out. He seemed especially annoyed that we'd escaped. I always assumed he was the leader. That experience was surreal and terrifying. It taught me to respect how a herd behaves differently from a single animal. The way they moved together in silence like a coordinated unit left me in awe and shook me to my core. Story 19. I was on a school trip to China, wandering around a night market with a group of about 10 high schoolers. The market had stalls selling fried bugs, bull testicles, and other adventurous foods, but we quickly lost our appetite. While we were hanging out, a Chinese man, probably in his 50s or 60s, struck up a conversation. He claimed to be the curator of a local art gallery and asked if we wanted to see some paintings. We were bored, so we agreed. He led us to what he called a gallery, a semi-rundown 5x5 meter building in the middle of a large paved courtyard near a popular tourist destination. It seemed safe enough given the location. The man stood in the doorway, inviting us inside to see the paintings, which were supposedly downstairs. Peering inside, there were no visible artworks or anything suggesting the building was a gallery. The entrance lamp was broken, with shards of glass scattered across the doorway, and a narrow, rickety staircase led down into an unlit basement. One of us started questioning the man about the broken glass. He kept deflecting, saying, "Don't worry, many paintings, beautiful." The atmosphere grew tense as we exchanged nervous glances. I suddenly yelled, "Cheese it!" and bolted. The whole group snapped out of it, sprinting across the courtyard. We didn't stop until we were at least 100 yards away, laughing nervously and cracking jokes about kidnappings and organ trafficking. It ended up being one of the funniest memories from the trip, but I'm so glad it wasn't the last. Story 20. About a year ago, I was at a stag-do bachelor party in Warsaw. As often happens at these events, we ended up at a strip club. I was sitting with a friend I'd known for years, but had only ever had jokey, non-serious conversations with. We were both jokers, so we never really got deep in our chats. This guy had a reputation for being with a different girl every week, but recently he'd gotten engaged. I was curious about what made this girl so special and why she changed his perspective on relationships. He opened up, saying it wasn't that he didn't want a serious relationship before, he just hadn't met someone he genuinely liked who liked him back. It was humbling to hear, especially since he always gave off the vibe of being a player. Then he asked me about my girlfriend and whether she was the one. Caught up in the moment, I started gushing. "She's amazing, she's beautiful, she's unbelievable. I think I want to marry her." Right at that moment, another friend walked over and overheard me. Totally misunderstanding the context, he pointed to the stage and said, "Wait, are you talking about the stripper?" The two of us just lost it. It was the first serious heart-to-heart conversation we'd ever had. And somehow, it turned into this hilarious joke. We laughed so hard, the kind of laugh where the other person laughing makes you laugh even more. The most ridiculous part, though, was what the poor stripper must have thought. From her perspective, someone pointed at her, said something, and then the three of us erupted into laughter. She probably thought we were mocking her. The best man eventually came over and said, "I don't know what you said to that stripper, but we need to leave now. She's sending the bouncers over." At first, we thought he was joking, but when he insisted, we left. Later, we pieced together what had happened and couldn't stop laughing about it. Story 21. I live in New Orleans, and a few years ago, my brother wanted to adopt a dog from a small rural town about 2 hours away called Clinton, Louisiana. The drive was easy enough, but as we got close to the town, I noticed an unusual number of police cars driving around. There were no sirens or speeding, but in the span of about 10 minutes, I saw 15, 20 patrol cars. We arrived at the foster mom's house, met the dog, a sweet pup named Tolly, and decided to adopt her. After spending a couple of hours there, we headed home. On the way back, Tally climbed into the front seat with me while I drove, leaving my brother in the back seat, which we found hilarious. As we drove out of Clinton, I noticed even more police cars. Again, no sirens, but they were everywhere. About 3 miles from the town's exit, an old white sedan suddenly sped up behind us, flashing its lights and honking. It wasn't a police car, but it felt unusual. I thought maybe they were hurt or needed help, so I began pulling over to the shoulder. As soon as I stopped, the sedan also stopped, about 10, 15 yards behind us. I turned to look at my brother, and the moment our eyes met, a deep sense of unease washed over me. Something wasn't right. I hesitated, still thinking maybe someone needed help. But as soon as the car door behind us opened, a voice in my head screamed, "Get out of there right now!" Without thinking, I floored it and sped off toward the exit, making sure no one followed us. We made it back to New Orleans safely, but I kept checking the rearview mirror the entire way home. I never found out what was going on with all the police cars or the white sedan, but my gut told me something was seriously wrong. Looking back, stopping was a mistake. It was reckless, and I'm lucky nothing happened. My theory is that there was a drug raid or police operation in the area, and the white sedan was trying to carjack us to evade the cops. I'll never know for sure, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts in time. Story 22. A couple of friends and I were standing outside a house party, just chatting. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something dart behind some bushes toward the end of the block, about 4 houses away. It was dark, so I wasn't sure what it was. We stayed outside for a while longer, and I thought I saw movement again, this time closer, by a tree. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, and I knew some people at the party were involved in sketchy stuff. That thought might have been playing tricks on my mind, but I got immediate goosebumps. I said, "Let's go, now." A couple of my friends gave me weird looks, but one later told me they knew by the look on my face that something was wrong. I apparently looked possessed. I had my keys on me, so we ran to my car and jumped in. I didn't even wait for everyone to put on their seatbelts before I floored it and got out of there. Not even 5 minutes later, according to the news, a group of people showed up and shot up the house. The others who had been standing outside were severely injured or killed. It turns out some of the guys at the party were believed to have killed a family member of the shooters, and this was a revenge attack. That was over 20 years ago, but I still get nervous standing outside anywhere at night, especially in neighborhoods that feel even remotely unsafe. Story 23. When I was 15, I moved to a new town in the middle of the school year. I met some kids who seemed cool, and they invited me to hang out and spend the night at one of their houses. The evening started off great. The host's mom made pizza, they had a pool table and a PlayStation, and I was having a lot of fun. Then they decided to go to Mike's house to buy some weed. I had never been around drugs before, but I was feeling rebellious and nervously agreed to tag along. Mike lived in a barely habitable trailer about 15 miles out of town, deep in the woods. The place was surrounded by a sketchy group of people. Mike himself was lanky, wild-eyed, and rail-thin, with a jittery demeanor that immediately made me uncomfortable. Being a big guy, I caught his attention right away. He kept grabbing my shoulders and sizing me up, saying I looked like a fighter and asking if I wanted to fight him. I declined, but he kept insisting and telling everyone I was going to fight him. My new friends just laughed it off and asked about buying weed. Mike made us drink first. I'd never had alcohol before, but I choked down the warm beer he shoved into my hand. As we drank, I noticed glass pipes, tin foil, guns, and a generally unsettling atmosphere. Mike kept stalling, saying, "Don't be in a hurry," and bringing out more things to smoke. He forced me to take a hit from a bong, laughing when I had a coughing fit. He kept calling me names, saying I was all talk despite my size. At one point, he joked about taking me to the back room to make a man out of me. Another woman started a monologue about the location of a man's G-spot. I was desperate to leave. I told my friend we should go, and he finally convinced Mike to sell him the weed. When I tried to leave, Mike slammed the door shut and started accusing me of being a narc. He demanded I strip naked to prove I wasn't wearing a wire. Then he said I'd have to smoke meth to prove I wasn't a cop. My friend did nothing. He was too stoned or too indifferent. Mike left the room, and 3 men pushed a couch in front of the door, laughing and saying we weren't going anywhere. Panicked, I walked down a hallway, looking for another way out. At the end was a laundry room with a door that was nailed shut. Mike started yelling for me to come back. I had no plan, but adrenaline kicked in. I kicked the door open, jumped down to the snowy ground, and ran into the woods. I heard commotion and screaming behind me, then gunshots. My heart was pounding as I made my way toward the road, avoiding the lane leading to the trailer. Eventually, I reached the frozen dirt road and started walking toward the highway, staying in the trees. Cars passed by, but I stayed hidden. Finally, I saw my friend's minivan. I stood up, waved, and prayed they wouldn't leave me behind. When I got in, they told me things had gone crazy after I escaped. Mike accused them of bringing a narc, pointed a gun at them, and fired out the door I had broken. They used the distraction to move the couch and escape. Not long after, Mike and several others were arrested in a drug bust. Years later, I was working at a grocery store when I saw Mike. He looked worse for wear, but he recognized me. My heart stopped. Story 24. I've worked as staff at a summer camp for 5 years. One long-standing tradition among the senior staff is sneaking out at night to drive into town, hang out, and act like hooligans. One night, 4 friends and I pushed a car quietly around the bend from the parking lot to avoid waking the adults, then hopped in and drove to town. After a few hours of laughs, Taco Bell Baja Blast, and teaching one of our friends how to drive in an empty parking lot, we found ourselves cruising down country roads. That is, until we turned onto a random road and something immediately felt off. It was around 3:30 a.m. We started descending a hill, and the road quickly transitioned from asphalt to gravel to dirt. The sides of the road were littered with eerie junk. An old rusted boat trailer tipped on its side, piles of rotting wood, and discarded tools. At the bottom of the hill, we saw 2 sheds, one with a garage door wide open, and the other, a plywood structure, with its door slightly ajar. Through the crack, a faintly flickering light shone, illuminating a nearby fuse box. The car fell silent. For a few moments, no one said a word as we all stared at the flickering light. Something about the atmosphere was deeply unsettling. To break the tension, we started joking, teasing one of our friends to go turn off the light or open the door. But then, without warning, the door creaked open wider. What happened next is a blur. I just remember hitting the gas and that early 2000s Toyota Camry tearing up the dirt road faster than it was ever designed to go. The 15-minute drive back to camp was almost completely silent. None of us wanted to talk about what we just experienced. Even now, when I think about sitting in that front seat and watching the flickering light, I get a knot in my stomach. Who or what was behind that door? And why were they there at 3:30 in the morning? Story 25. My girlfriend and I once rented an Airbnb in Fort Worth that turned out to be an absolute nightmare. When we arrived, the property was gated with padlocks and security cameras. A barefoot woman came to open the gate for us. The property was overgrown with shrubbery, and furniture was scattered everywhere. The main house was in terrible shape, with rotting wood and a general air of neglect. When we went inside, the host asked us to sign waivers, our first red flag. We were then shown to our room, which turned out to be a decrepit old RV parked at the back of the property. The front of the RV was collapsed, poorly covered with a bedsheet. Trying to justify the situation to ourselves, my girlfriend and I decided to explore the property to make sure we weren't overreacting. As we wandered, we saw long wooden boxes with strange labels on them. The people we encountered, while seemingly normal, all seemed oddly entranced, and none of them wore shoes. Then a little girl approached us. Like everyone else, she was barefoot. At first, the conversation was friendly, but it quickly took a dark turn. She began talking about knives and said something like, "What if I cut someone up with a knife and put them in the oven?" At first, I thought she was joking, but she kept following us, repeating these morbid comments. That's when I knew we needed to leave. I told the host that my girlfriend and I wanted to grab dinner in town. using it as an excuse for her to unlock the gate without raising suspicion. Once the gate was open, we drove away and never looked back. Story 26. A few years ago, a friend and I visited Paris. We were both in our 20s at the time. One afternoon, we went to a restaurant for lunch and met a man who introduced himself as the owner. While asking us how we enjoyed our meal, he noticed we weren't French and asked about our nationality. He then said he had a good friend from our country and insisted on calling him to let him know that some girls from his homeland were dining at his restaurant. He handed me his phone, and I spoke to this friend briefly. Nothing seemed unusual, just small talk. Before the call ended, the man invited us to a party with live music and drinks that evening. Since we didn't have any plans, we exchanged numbers and agreed to meet later. That night, we went to the address he gave us. It was in an abandoned area with no people or activity in sight. While we waited, a car approached. It was him, a man in his 50s. He was polite, apologized for keeping us waiting, and said the party wasn't far. My friend and I were scared but tried to act cool. During the drive, he chatted about his life, saying he had lived in France for over 30 years, but missed our country and hadn't visited in years because of work. He seemed normal, but we knew we'd made a mistake. It was too late to back out. We arrived at a dark building with no signs of a party. He apologized again, saying the party had been canceled, but that some friends were inside. He suggested we go in for drinks and chat for a bit before he drove us back to our hotel. I told him we preferred to go back to our hotel and asked if he could drop us off at the nearest bus station. He insisted on spending more time with us, offering to cook something since I'd mentioned we were hungry. I stayed calm and polite, not wanting to upset him. Eventually, he agreed to drive us back. We gave him a fake hotel address. When we finally saw the city lights again, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Once out of the car, I couldn't believe how naive we had been, or how lucky we were that nothing happened. Story 27. When I was a kid, I lived close to my school and often played there in the evenings before dinner or whenever I was bored. The school was surrounded by houses and near a busy street, so it felt safe. One day, I went with a friend who was about a year older than me. The school had 2 yards, one for older kids and one for younger kids. The big play structure we liked was in the younger kids' yard. There was a small corridor connecting the 2 yards. While we were playing, I noticed a man in a hoodie slowly walking into our yard. We stayed there for about 20 minutes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was moving slowly, staying close to a wall that blocked the house's view of the yard. He was also closer to the exit than we were. I'll never forget watching him casually kick a pizza box as he moved closer to us. I turned to my friend and said we needed to leave because something felt very wrong. Before we could move, I heard my father calling my name. I turned to see him running across the schoolyard with our neighbor. My father, who was in his 60s and rarely ran, looked panicked. The man bolted. My father chased him while our neighbor brought us to my friend's house. We stayed there late into the evening while my friend's mom tried to explain what a child molester was. I was only 9 and terrified. My father, my neighbor, and my friend's dad searched for the man but never found him. To this day, I have no idea how my father knew something was wrong. From where he was at home, the man wouldn't have been visible, but I'm certain he saved my life and my friend's that day. Story 28. I was driving on the highway late at night with my girlfriend when I noticed some large rocks in the middle of the road. Thankfully, I had my high beams on and managed to come to a full stop. The area wasn't rocky and there wasn't an embankment nearby, so I was puzzled as to where the rocks came from. Then I noticed movement in my rearview mirror, a man emerging from the bushes. Instantly, I knew something was wrong. My instincts screamed, "Leave now!" I threw the car into reverse, nearly hitting the man behind me, then did a J-turn and drove the wrong way down the highway until I reached an off-ramp. It was around 11 p.m., and the stretch of highway was notorious for hijackings. I later learned that hijackers place large rocks in the road at night. When drivers hit the rocks and stop to inspect the damage, the hijackers emerge, rob them at gunpoint, and often steal the car if it's still drivable. I'm grateful I wasn't a victim that night. I can't bear to think what might have happened to my girlfriend if I hadn't acted quickly. Story 29. We planned to spend one of the last weekends of winter at a ski resort close to home. It was me, my boyfriend, and another couple. The plan was to stay at a cabin we had access to, even though it was in poor condition. We didn't mind since it had electricity and heating, which we figured would be enough. We arrived at around 6 p.m. after work and decided to party that night and ski the next day. However, when we got there, we realized there was no electricity. There was a blackout across the entire mountain. Despite this, everyone wanted to stay, even though I repeatedly suggested we leave. I reluctantly agreed to stay for a bit, but said if things got worse, we'd have to leave. Things definitely got worse. With no electricity, there was no heat. The cabin had a heating system that relied on both wood and electricity. Wood to heat a container of water and electricity to pump the water into the radiators. Without power, starting a fire would risk the water container exploding. The boys decided to drive into town to borrow a generator from a friend. They returned at around 11 p.m. Meanwhile, the other girl and I were freezing in the cabin, trying to keep warm by drinking, dancing, and playing music on our phones. Outside, a snowstorm raged. You could barely see your own shoes. When the boys came back, we helped them unload supplies from the car, parked 50 meters away from the cabin. It was pitch dark, freezing cold, and the wind was brutal. I'd never experienced anything like it. We set up the generator in the semi-basement thinking it was a smart idea. You can probably guess what happened next. Once the generator was running, we had electricity and started a fire for heating, but soon the cabin filled with smoke, forcing us to open the windows. That was when I hit my limit. I told everyone I wanted to leave. I knew the chimney wasn't functioning properly, and I couldn't rest with the smoke and fumes in the cabin. Still, we were tired, slightly drunk, and decided to stay a bit longer. It was so cold. I'd never been that cold in my life. My body was shaking, and I forgot what warmth even felt like. We went to bed, or at least tried to. My boyfriend and I stayed in a room upstairs, while the other couple stayed downstairs. Around 2 a.m., the other couple burst into our room, barely able to stand, and told us we had to leave immediately. No time to pack, we just ran. Once we were safely outside, they told us what had happened. The fumes from the generator had leaked into their room. The guy had felt dizzy and managed to wake his girlfriend before collapsing. She'd barely made it out herself, passing out briefly in the snow. We were lucky the fumes hadn't reached upstairs yet. Everyone was okay in the end, but it was a terrifying experience. If something isn't right, don't ignore it. Leave. Story 30. My friend and I were stuck at a shady bus station in Richmond, Virginia. We were told the next bus to our destination wouldn't arrive until morning, but there was a chance an earlier bus might stop for us if the driver agreed. We waited for 2 hours, sitting on our suitcases by an outlet near the bathroom. When my friend asked again about the bus, we were told it had been delayed by several hours. If we were lucky, it might arrive by 10 p.m., and we'd reach our destination around 1 a.m. if the driver even agreed to take us. As it got darker and the station filled with sketchy characters, we reconsidered our options. Across the street was a rundown motel where we were told we could wait until morning. That was the last straw. We decided to leave. We spent $80 on a lift to our hotel and invited another girl who was also waiting alone for the same bus. We weren't about to leave her there. As we left, a family of 4 looked hopeful, thinking a bus had finally arrived. I felt bad, but we couldn't risk staying. Story 31. There's an abandoned amusement park a few miles from where I grew up. One night, my friends and I decided to sneak in and explore it. The park was still privately owned and had security cameras, but it had been closed for 12 years and was barely maintained. Nothing unusual happened while we were inside, but as we crawled back under the fence and headed to our getaway car, we noticed a white van. The van hadn't been there when we entered. We would have noticed and joked about it. We had to drive through the old parking lot to reach the road. We sprinted to our car, bolted out of there, and didn't look back. Nothing ever came of it, but the van's sudden appearance changed the mood of our adventure completely. Story 32. While living in Cape Town, South Africa, my wife and I went out for dinner and caught a taxi. We asked the driver to drop us off at Station Road. What we didn't know was that every suburb in the area has a station road, as it's where the train stations are located. When we realized we'd gone too far, we asked to be let out. The driver suggested we just hop into another taxi to get back. That should have been a huge red flag, but it was still daylight, so we decided to walk. The street was eerily quiet. Grocery bags tumbled down the road like tumbleweeds, and a kid in underwear pretended to shoot a gun at us. I noticed a group of men behind us and another group ahead, turning the corner. Something felt off, but I convinced myself it was fine. It was just a poor neighborhood, not necessarily dangerous. Then I heard the rev of an engine behind us. A car sped the wrong way down the street, forcing the men behind us to jump out of the way. It stopped beside us, a newer Corolla driven by an older Indian man. He rolled down his window and said, "Get in the car. Those guys are going to rob you and probably kill you." Suddenly, everything clicked. My wife and I jumped into the car just as the men started running toward us. The driver explained he'd seen the men split up to ambush us and turned around to save us. If he hadn't come, I'm certain we wouldn't have made it out unscathed. Story 33. A few years ago, I went to a music festival that took a bad turn when thunderstorms were reported nearby. The organizers decided to temporarily shut down the park for safety reasons. It was day 2, and the weather had been hot, humid, and drizzly all day. People were already annoyed, and the announcement made things worse. Many refused to leave, and the crowd became restless. Most of the protests were harmless, booing, singing, and sitting in the mud. But a few people tried to rush the stage. The festival organizers called the police to handle the situation. My best friend and I stayed in the crowd, booing along with everyone else. We were caught up in that irrational group anger, thinking, we paid for this. They can't just kick us out. The cops arrived, but the storm didn't, so people still refused to leave. The police didn't use force, but stood silently, which only made the crowd more defiant. While this was happening, a skinny guy and his girlfriend started chatting with us about how ridiculous the situation was. We nodded politely, but didn't really engage. The guy kept talking, getting louder and more agitated. His girlfriend egged him on, saying things like, "They don't know what you're capable of, you're a killer." That's when I got a bad feeling. Suddenly, the guy stuck his hands in the back of his pants, looked at a nearby cop, and said, "Don't worry, girls, I've got something for him." He started walking toward the cop with his girlfriend following close behind. I grabbed my friend and said, "We're leaving, now." We didn't wait to see what happened or look back. I wasn't about to take any chances, especially in America, where public shootings are all too common. Story 34. In my mid-20s, I worked 2 jobs to support myself, my girlfriend, and her daughter. By day, I poured concrete. By night, I worked as a sous chef at a restaurant. One Tuesday started like any other. I left for the construction site at 6:30 a.m. and spent the day pouring basement floors in 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat. By 3:30 p.m., I was exhausted but had to head straight to the restaurant for my evening shift. The restaurant kitchen was sweltering, with the air conditioning barely making a difference. By the end of the night, I was drenched in sweat and grease. I got home just before midnight, completely drained, only to find the kitchen in chaos. Piles of unwashed dishes, pots, and pans. I kicked off my shoes and headed to the bedroom to shower and change, but my girlfriend asked me to go buy her a pack of cigarettes. I told her I was too tired and suggested she go instead since I'd just gotten home. This led to a massive argument where she called me every name in the book. After 2 hours of fighting, I finally fell asleep, only to be woken up by her pushing a spit-soaked finger into my ear, laughing hysterically. That was the last straw. I missed both jobs the next day, pretending to work at night so I could figure out a way to leave. Story 35. I catered a family reunion for about 200 people. From the start, I knew it was going to be a disaster because no one had a clear plan to pay the remaining balance of the bill. The client had paid a 50% deposit to reserve the date, but the other half was due on the day of the event. I told them I wouldn't serve the food until I was paid in full. After about 90 minutes of back and forth, I collected most of the balance in cash, around $3,000, and a check for the rest, which later bounced and took 4 months to recover. Once the food was served, everyone seemed happy. But the event space owners, who were shady from the start, came over to tell me that the venue was booked for another event in 30 minutes. I didn't care. I had been paid and just wanted to pack up and leave. That's when I found out the second group was a college fraternity that had been kicked off campus for violence. They were already causing trouble with the family reunion group. I told my team to leave immediately. No cleanup, no packing, just go. As I packed up my equipment and stashed the cash in my truck, chaos erupted. I left without saying a word. By the time I got home, about 35 minutes later, there was a breaking news story. A shooting had occurred at the venue. 2 people were dead, and 4 were critically injured. Story 36. I was around 31, 32 weeks pregnant with twins when things took a terrifying turn. I had just been discharged from the hospital the day before after dealing with twin B's absent and reverse diastolic flow, which had been corrected. The next morning, my stomach began to hurt badly. I assumed it was indigestion after indulging in pizza and crazy bread following a week of bland hospital food. But the pain was unbearable and unrelenting, no matter what position I was in. After 4 agonizing hours, I told my fiancée we needed to go to the hospital. My father-in-law came to get me, breaking a few traffic laws during the hour-long drive to the hospital where my specialist worked. At the hospital, they hooked me up to monitors, ran labs, and gave me meds to ease the pain. For 3 hours I waited, the pain still gnawing at me. Then a nurse came in to deliver the news. I had HELLP syndrome. The excruciating pain I'd been feeling was my liver distending as my organs began to fail. My blood pressure was 198/80ths, and my heart was racing uncontrollably. The nurse explained the severity of the situation. I needed an emergency C-section immediately. I just told my fiancé to go home 15 minutes earlier. I asked if I could call him to have him there for the procedure, but there wasn't time. The C-section was successful, and we managed to get a few precious pictures of the moment. Recovery was grueling, and I suffered lasting damage to my kidneys, heart, liver, and brain. I'm incredibly grateful that I made it to the hospital in time. Apparently, some women ignore the symptoms of HELP syndrome and don't survive. Story 37. The night before, my girlfriend dumped me. I was 16, heartbroken, and my best friend decided the best way to cheer me up was to take me to the lake and get drunk. My friend, his 18-year-old cousin, the cousin's 19-year-old friend, and I piled into a car and drove 30 miles to the lake around noon. At the beach, we met another group of people. I mentally labeled them a dad, a mom, whose jaw was wired shut from a car wreck, two teenage daughters, 15 and 16, their attractive neighbor, 27, and her two kids, an 8-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl. My friend and I started chatting with the daughters while the 19-year-old immediately went after the neighbor. After a few hours of flirting and drinking, the mom and dad decided to leave, letting the daughters ride back with us. We dropped the girls off at their house in a small Kansas town, but as soon as we pulled up, we heard chaos inside. The girls freaked out, scrambled out of the car, and ran inside. My friend and I followed them and walked into the middle of a domestic fight. The dad, actually the mother's abusive boyfriend, was beating her. Without a word, my friend and I charged at him. At 6'4" and 200 pounds, I hit him like a freight train. My friend, 6'2" and 230 pounds, wasn't far behind. The guy didn't stand a chance. We locked him in a closet, made sure the mom and girls were okay, and decided it was time to leave. But the 19-year-old and his friend had disappeared to the neighbor's house. We found them, but the 19-year-old refused to leave. He thought he had a shot with the neighbor and begged for more time. Surreal as it was, I couldn't think of what else to do. While we waited, the neighbor's kid suddenly screamed, "Daddy!" and ran out the door. A massive man had pulled up in a 4x4. I saw the butt of a gun as he got out of the truck. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I dismantled the screen from the window, climbed out, and got into the car. I heard 2 gunshots as I started to drive. The others jumped into the car through the passenger window as I sped off. We were on the highway when we passed 3 sheriff's cars racing toward the scene. Hours later, after arrests were made, I got home. My stepdad grounded me for my poor life choices. The sheriff later told him that while I may have made some bad decisions, I probably saved lives that day. Story 38. On my 12th birthday, my cousin brought bottle rockets to my party. My friends, cousin, and I climbed up to the roof and started firing them into the sandlot across the street. This caught the attention of some neighborhood troublemakers. They came over, saw us, and immediately started talking trash. At first, we didn't take them seriously. They just sounded like idiots trying to act tough. Even now, I can't understand why they decided to pick a fight with kids minding their own business. My mom heard the commotion and came outside to yell at them. She knew these kids had older siblings in a local gang, so we decided to play it safe and went inside. We also called the police as a precaution. Not long after, the group returned with reinforcements, baseball bats and bike chains in hand. Luckily, the police arrived right behind them and scared them off before anything could happen. A week later, there was a drive-by shooting in the neighborhood. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Story 39. In the summer of 2005, I visited Portland with some friends for the first time. We were all metalheads meeting up for shows and hanging out with people we knew from band forums online. My buddy and I stayed at a cheaper hotel near the airport and planned to use Portland's public transportation to get around. Coming from a place with no public transit, it was a new experience for us. On one trip downtown, a sketchy-looking guy got on the light rail carrying a large cardboard box. He clutched it tightly and kept nervously looking around. My friend and I immediately noticed him and started watching him closely. However, our Seattle friends, who were used to city life, dismissed our concerns and called us paranoid. This was only days after the London Tube bombings, so tensions were high, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At the next stop, the man suddenly dropped his box and bolted off the train. My friend and I panicked and jumped off too, hiding behind some trees near the platform. As we watched, the man jumped back on the train, clutching his box again. Our Seattle friends stayed on the train and later teased us for being paranoid, saying we needed to get out more. Maybe we overreacted, but in that moment I wasn't willing to take the chance. Story 40. When I was 17, I moved out of my parents' house and in with my boyfriend. I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, one of them as a cashier at a gas station in a small town. One evening, I was invited to a bonfire and fishing trip by some regulars. The group seemed nice, mostly couples, and I decided to go. After a while, someone who hadn't been drinking offered to drive us to get more beer. I went along thinking it would be a quick trip. Instead of heading back, they took a detour, saying they needed to pick someone up. Just down the road turned into a 20-minute drive, and I started feeling uneasy. We pulled up to a house, and I immediately sensed something was wrong. Before I could ask to leave, an argument broke out. A man outside the house asked if someone named A was in the back seat. When the driver responded, "Yeah, who the fuck wants to know?" The man pulled out a gun. The driver floored it, and I heard gunshots. Luckily, the bullets were stopped by a heavy-duty toolbox in the back of the truck. When the truck finally stopped, I shoved the door open and ran, calling my boyfriend to come get me. The next day at work, I found out the shooter was looking for everyone in the truck that night. Another regular, who turned out to be the shooter's cousin, intervened on my behalf, calling his cousin and telling him to leave me alone. Later, the shooter himself showed up at the gas station to apologize, saying he didn't realize I wasn't involved. He promised to watch my back from then on. The entire situation was surreal and terrifying. I don't mess with drugs, and I never would have gone to that bonfire if I'd known what these people were involved in. Story 41. A few years ago, my friend and I went to the beach with her family. I was 21 and she was 22. She wanted to find a party to crash, and while I wasn't thrilled with the idea, I decided to go along since I'd never done anything like that before. Her plan was to hang out by the beer section in a grocery store until someone invited us to a party. It sounded ridiculous, but surprisingly, 2 guys actually invited us to one they were hosting. I still felt uneasy and asked her if it was a good idea. She reassured me, saying we'd leave if things got weird or I wasn't having fun. I decided not to drink, trusting my gut and wanting to stay alert in case we needed to leave. The party turned out to be in the middle of nowhere. When we arrived, there were about 20 guys and just 2 other girls, including us. Everyone seemed kind and welcoming at first. They started a bonfire and things felt lighthearted. But then the only other girl there found out it was her on-again, off-again boyfriend who had invited us. She was furious. We tried to steer clear of her to avoid drama. While standing near the bonfire, someone offered me a drink. I politely declined, but he kept insisting. When I refused again, he started poking me in the chest. I asked him to stop. He didn't. I asked again more firmly, but instead of stopping, he called me a bitch and spit on my foot. That was it. I slapped him across the face, turned around, and grabbed my friend. I told her we were leaving immediately. She saw how serious I was and didn't argue. We got into her car, but before we could leave, the entire party swarmed around us. My window was open, and the angry girl threw her drink at me and punched me in the face. At the same time, a guy jumped onto the hood of the car and started hitting the windshield with an empty wine bottle. We were trapped because another car was parked behind us. I made the split-second decision to ram the car behind us, pushing it out of the way, and sped off. The night was absolute chaos, but I'm just glad I didn't drink and that nothing worse happened. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut and not gone at all, but I was young and naive. It was a hard lesson learned.